Alright, so in the last video we were working with a model, just a supply and demand model, where we had the rest of the world and then we had a small nation. And the big distinction there was that the supply and demand from the small nation was so small, was so minuscule, that it wouldn't affect the rest of the world equilibrium at all. So what we did there is we just took the price from the rest of the world and we just went ahead and rolled it over to the small nation. And if the price of the rest of the world was higher than the equilibrium price for the small nation, then it would export some of its good. And if the equilibrium price for the rest of the world was lower than the equilibrium price for the rest of the nation, or not for the rest of the nation, for the small nation, excuse me, then the small nation would import some of that good from the rest of the world. But the supply and demand in the small nation never affected the supply and demand in the rest of the world. So that model makes a lot of sense for a country like Portugal maybe, or maybe Panama or Costa Rica, these small nations that are actually small in size and in population. But it doesn't make a lot of sense if we start talking about China and the United States. So this model is another way of using supply and demand diagrams to look at an equilibrium in a world market with trade. So this video is just going to be an introduction, and then from here we'll go on and we'll actually go play with this model back over on the blackboard so that you can kind of see how all the calculations are done and work through an example on your own. Alright, so just to start off with, I've just gone ahead and said that this is the demand line for the Chinese market for toys, and then this is the supply line for the Chinese market for toys. So demand is in blue over here, and then supply is in red over here. So you read this chart and you say at a price of $2 there are 50 toys supplied in China, and there are about 100, a little bit more, no, just a little bit less than 100 toys demanded. So then, excuse me. So then we see that the equilibrium price in the Chinese market is somewhere in between $2 and $4. It actually looks at right about $3 for if there was no trade. And we can go up in the table here and we can see, just based on these three columns, that the equilibrium price would be just a little bit over $3, because at $3, 80 toys are demanded and 90 toys are supplied. Excuse me, it would be just a little bit under $3, because here we have too much demand and too little demand and too much supply. So we need to increase demand a little and decrease supply a little to make them equal. So we need to lower the price just a little bit. Alright, so then this is just kind of familiarizing you with the demand and supply lines that would be given. So this is China with no trade. And then we also have the US with no trade, the USA with no trade. And so in the USA we can see that the equilibrium is about $15. A toy would cost $15 in the USA if there were no trade. So these are just simple supply and demand diagrams, really going back right to kind of the first thing you learned in this class. So now we're going to go and we're going to talk about what happens in a world market if trade is frictionless, if there is absolutely no cost of trading between China and the US. And obviously that's not true, but it's a close enough approximation that it makes more sense to talk about there being no costs as an introduction than to there being a ton of costs. And you can go ahead and work costs into this model, but it just makes it a little bit more complicated. So we're going to start with no costs of trade whatsoever. Alright, so we're going to assume then that this is just a two-nation model, and you can do this with as many nations as you want, but you just have to add more and more stuff up. So we're going to start with just two nations, and you get all the intuition there that you need. So if there's only China and the USA in the entire world, they're the only countries that want and produce toys, then the demand, this just stands for the quantity demanded, the demand for the world market for toys is just going to be the sum of the demand for China added to the demand in the USA. So this cell is just going to be 600. So at a price of $1 then, there are 600 toys demanded in the entire world. So now if we just go ahead and copy that all the way down to, we'll copy it down to here, we then see that at a price of, oh, let's just pick another nice round number. So at a price of $5 here, there are 460 toys demanded in the entire world, just adding up 60 to 400. So then we're going to do the exact same thing for supply. So at a price of $1 then, we're going to see that China will supply 10 toys and the USA will supply 5 toys. So there will be a total of 15 toys supplied in the entire world. And if we just drag that down, then we get a supply and demand diagram for the entire world. And so I'm going to go ahead and talk about supply a little bit more before I go ahead and talk about supply and demand together. So just one more way to interpret this is that at a price of, if toys were to be $5, China would supply 170 and the US would supply 45. So there would be a total of 215, which is 170 plus 45 in the entire world, because there would be 170 made in China and 45 made in the USA. So as you can guess, we're going to go ahead and look for the place where in the entire world market, supply is equal to demand. Because that's where the world market for toys, remember we're assuming that only the USA and China are the only two nations in the world that we're worrying about. So we can go ahead and find an equilibrium price and quantity then, where the world market is in equilibrium, and there are as many toys produced in the entire world, there are as many toys supplied in the entire world as there are demanded. And so I went ahead and played around with these numbers a bunch before I actually started recording this, so that we can see, if we go over here, if toys cost $1, a ton, way more are demanded than are supplied. Same thing at $3, 530 is greater than 115. Same thing down at $6, there's still going to be an excess demand for toys. And if we go all the way down to $8 then, we can see that this is an equilibrium. That there are 355 toys are demanded in the entire world, and 355 toys are supplied. So then the equilibrium price, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight this in yellow. So then the equilibrium price will be $8. The equilibrium quantity will be 355, and that point will be represented by where my mouse is right now. So just to go back and reiterate, when you're looking at a two-nation model, all that you do is you add up their demands, which is also called horizontally summing the demand curves. It's literally just adding across. And you add up their supplies. You horizontally sum their supply lines, just adding across also. So we get 600 here just by adding 100, the demand in China, to 500, the demand in the USA, to get a world demand of 600 units. And you do the same thing for supply, and then you just go find where they're equal, and that's your equilibrium price and quantity. Now the next thing, and this is the reason that this entire model is worth even looking at, is that we can say who is going to export toys and who is going to import toys. And the way we do that is we go to the China graph and we go to the USA graph, and we know that the equilibrium price is $8. So then we go back and see if toys are $8, 30 toys are demanded in China, and China produces 280 toys. So China is going to then export, and they're going to export the difference between 280 and 30. So they will export then, and I'm going to just change the color of this, they will export 250 toys. And the way that we can see this graphically, and I'll go make this a little bit clearer in the blackboard when I can actually draw on these things, is that all that we're doing here is we're saying we know that the equilibrium world price for toys will be $8, So we're just finding the difference between this point right here and this point right here. And that's just 280 minus 30, because this is 30 right here and this is 280. So if that doesn't make sense here, it's just because I can't write on these things, I promise. It's really, really simple, and I'll go ahead and show you that in the next video. Now, in the other hand, if China is exporting 250 toys, we should be able to bet that the US is importing 250 toys. And they are, but I'll go ahead and show you how to work that out. So the graphical way, and it's not going to be very clear here because we can't see where 8 is, but it would be to go down to find 8 right here, and then we would do the difference between the quantity supplied, which is in red, and the quantity demanded, which is in blue. And we would see that that difference here would be, at a price of 8, would be 250. The way to go ahead and do it with a table is to go ahead and say, we figured out that they will import just because China is exporting, and these are the only 2 nations in the world for our model. And so we'll do this in blue. And so then the amount that they're going to import is just going to be the difference between their quantity demanded and the quantity supplied domestically, the quantity supplied in the USA. And we see that that is 250. So everything checks out, and we can see that China will export 250 toys to the United States. So the United States will import 250 toys from China. So hopefully that was clear. I'm kind of bummed that I can't go ahead and write in Excel, like write over all of these graphs, because I think that would make it a lot clearer. But in the next video, I'll go ahead and copy these graphs over to the Blackboard so that I can actually draw on them and kind of just go back through this one more time really quickly. So I hope that that was clear. If not, go ahead and watch the next video and then kind of go back and try and figure out all your questions. So I'll see you there.